Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Rap fire, math table, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, set and ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of The Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and welcome to episode number 56. So excited to jump into it tonight. We've got a full course of The Maple Pill for you guys. We're going to be talking about how mainstream media is still struggling to interpret Pierre Poilievre's relationship with Bitcoin. At this point in time, again, I've mentioned it with you guys in the past. I'm kind of flip-flopping here, whether this is a white pill or a red pill or a black pill or a clown pill at this moment in time. And so I've actually categorized two different stories around Pierre Poilievre and Bitcoin in two separate segments of tonight's show because, you know, on the one hand, it's very frustrating to see mainstream media constantly misinterpret and misrepresent Bitcoin and Bitcoin's potential, particularly for Canadians and as an inflation hedge. And on the other hand, it's also a white pill moment because, hey, we're obviously a little bit earlier than I realized. And I mean, at least it seems like a lot of the corporate elites and mainstream media aren't stacking sats, which gives all of us little guys a little bit more of an advantage to get ahead of the curve on all this. And we've got lots of other things to talk about tonight. Government mismanagement, $106 million mistake, which honestly is just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about COVID misspending. But anyways, let's jump into tonight's Maple Pill and we'll roll from there. So the first story I want to share with you guys, and this is going to be our first blue pill story of the day, from Western Standard, Bank of Canada expected to bring out its big guns April 13th to battle inflation. So first of all, just curious, what's everyone's hot take on this? At this point in time, I imagine you guys know where I stand. I am not expecting to see a 50 basis point increase. In fact, again, I know this is counterintuitive to what everyone else is saying. I still truly think that they're primarily doves at the Bank of Canada versus hawks. So it'll be interesting to see whether they increase it 0.25% or 25 basis points. Again, I've got no crystal ball, so my advice is worth exactly what you're paying for it right now. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions because I know a lot of you are real estate investors. What's your hot take? What are you expecting to see play out on April 13th? So again, we'll be seeing that very shortly, actually. So again, let me know in the comment section, what's your hot take on Canada's, or the Bank of Canada, I should say, rate? Let me know. Next from Toronto Star, Pierre Poilievre is courting millennials with a new kind of populism. Here's what Bitcoin has to do with it. And so I primarily just wanted to use this as a jumping off point to talk about, again, we shared it last week. I'm going to share it this week. Mainstream media clearly does not get Bitcoin. And I can't help but wonder if they're purposely being obtuse or whether they actually just don't even give a shit about doing research. And so they'd rather just jump to conclusions. Now, to be fair, this article in the Toronto Star, which I forgot I was on a paywall here, but this article in the Toronto Star, I thought was a little bit more balanced than some of the other coverage I've seen going on in mainstream media. Now, again, in my opinion, you kind of have to scroll down to the last third in order to really start to get exposed to, Bitcoiners' perspectives on everything related to this. So not a perfect article by any stretch of the imagination. If you guys are looking for better Bitcoin resources, I encourage you to start with books like The Bitcoin Standard, The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. Read the Bitcoin white paper. It's only 7 or 8 pages long. Relatively quick read, all things considered. So again, if you guys have heard me going on about Bitcoin, if you guys have had me trying to orange pill you for a while, and for whatever reason you haven't taken it seriously or you haven't been interested in it, just remind yourself every now and then that, hey, the government seems to really not like Bitcoin. Hey, mainstream media likes to really misrepresent Bitcoin. Well, based upon past experiences and past patterns, that actually kind of makes me like Bitcoin, even if I knew nothing about Bitcoin. So again, I really encourage you guys, now is the time to start educating yourself and at least understanding what's going on in regards to the world of Bitcoin, because I think inflation's here to stay in Canada. Next from the National Post, what to expect in the 2022 federal budget. And so I think that we're going to see all kinds of spending in this upcoming budget. I think we're also going to see a lot of excuses made. So if I remember correctly, initially forecasts were saying this budget was expected to only have a $50 or $60 billion deficit. One, that's kind of crazy that I'm saying only. But two, now that the war with Ukraine's broken out and things like that, or the war in Ukraine has broken out, I don't see how they're not going to use that and the new NDP Liberal Alliance as excuses in order to inflate the budget, spend more money, and put us deeper into deficit. A reminder, in case you're not keeping track, we're literally at almost $1.2 trillion in deficit or debt here in Canada on a federal level. Not an insignificant amount. In fact, I'm so old. I remember the days when The Simpsons used to make jokes about like $1 trillion bill or about $1 trillion because it sounded like such an abstract amount of money that like you couldn't really get your, you couldn't actually understand it because it's just so many zeros, such a big number. And yet here we are, literally 1.2 trillion in debt here in Canada. So this National Post article just kind of highlights a handful of different areas where they expect to see new expenditures or new focus in this federal budget. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. What would you like to see in this federal budget? What are you expecting? Is there anything you fear in this federal budget? Let me know in the comment section because I really would be curious to hear your take on it. A couple things, though, that do stand out, in my opinion, is, dental care. We're expecting to see that roll out. Again, it will probably take a couple years before it's fully rolled out to essentially like be implemented for all low-income families. And who knows what even stands on the horizon beyond that. Pharmacare. Now, based upon what we understand right now about the Liberal NDP alliance, there's no guarantee per se that they're going to roll out pharmacare this year or even in the next year or two. But the estimates currently for such a plan is what the NDP would like to see is $5.21 billion in its first full year of operation, rising to an average of around $11.1 billion in the 3 years after that. But again, the agreement between the NDP and Liberals doesn't promise a full plan will be implemented by 2025. It's more just moving in that direction. But again, we'll see how this all plays out. But right now, if you were to offer me a bet on the over-under in regards to a $50 billion deficit projection, I'm going to bet that we're going to be over it. I bet that we're going to spend more money and we'll have greater than a $50 billion deficit. But let me know in the comments, what's your hot take on all this? And then another blue pill story I want to explore with you guys, and something that we're going to see in the mainstream narrative for an extended period of time, in my opinion, is everything around gas-powered vehicles, right? So I understand right now, currently, Canada plans to essentially outlaw or ban gas-powered cars by 2035. So the idea of being able to buy a new gas-powered vehicle, there will be some exemptions for, I think, industry as well as agricultural. But this is the direction that our political elites would love to move towards. This first article here is really just exploring the unintended consequences around this government policy. So for the average Canadian, one of the most impactful planks of the federal government's newly released emissions reduction plan was a 2035 pledge to ban all sales of private vehicles running on internal combustion engines. While there will be exceptions for semi-trucks and agricultural vehicles, in just 13 years, it will become illegal to purchase a new car or truck powered by gasoline or diesel. And so they're definitely, if we actually stick to this policy or this plan, we will see a lot of unintended consequences. This article does a decent job of highlighting some of those potential unintended consequences. But this to me just opens up a much bigger discussion that we need to be having in regards to politicians and policy. Do we really want politicians and policy deciding every action we take, right? Do we want them influencing every decision we make? Because that's the trajectory we're on. At this point in time, the government does not respect you or your ability to make your own individual decisions, right? The idea of a free market of ideas or choices or decisions to be made by the average citizen is completely distasteful to the plutocratic elites. They literally just want to be able to tell us exactly what we do, when we do it, how we do it. And, they'll tell us afterwards why we did it. If we're good, I imagine they'll eventually tell us why we have to jump through all these hoops. But as I mentioned last week, recently I was just exposed and started going down the rabbit hole of Alex Epstein's content. And what's interesting, in the past, I've mentioned books like False Alarm, which, again, really encourage you guys, which looks at climate alarmism and tries to put it into realistic context and not under this like gloom and doom that we seem constantly to be barraged with by mainstream media and, global warming or climate change pundits. But Alex actually takes an even more contrarian perspective than just calling out the climate alarmism. And instead, he's actually making a strong argument for fossil fuels. And that, again, it's just interesting because the way the narrative is framed these days, right? It appears that, we need to have zero impact on the climate. But honestly, every single living entity to some extent has an impact on the climate. And yet we now apparently want to hold humans to a zero net impact. And this opens up a can of worms, such as like, so are we stating that this moment in time is when our climate's perfect? Are we saying that, oh, if we can only roll back the clock 50 years, the climate was perfect then? You know, the climate is always a dynamic system. And while I get it, like sometimes I'll make jokes about the weather and the weather isn't climate and yada, yada, yada. Again, right now, the way it's framed is that inherently any adjustments, any impact we have on the climate is obviously negative. And we can never even explore discussions, right? Like, what if it turns out that actually by seeing, you know, temperatures rise a degree, that we're actually able to open up more green belts, or it becomes easier for us to sustain our current population or even larger populations. And again, like I said, I'm new to Alex's content, but starting to go down that rabbit hole and finding his perspective and some of the information he shares are really refreshing. So I encourage you guys to check it out if you're so inclined. But then wanted to highlight another article around electric vehicles. This one's from Reuters. Canada to invest $518 million in 2 GM plants in Ontario. One of these GM plants will be producing electric vehicles. And this is all part of like GM's $2 billion plus investment in its Oshawa plant and Cami assembly plant at Ingersoll. And while, you know, GM in theory investing $2 billion is definitely a net positive for Canada, I think, you know, we need to really look at this is the Canadian government spending $518 million to help GM spend $2 billion really worth it, right? And one of the things that I constantly, again, maybe I'm just thick, maybe I'm just stupid when it comes to this. One thing I'm constantly curious about is we hear about all these government grants and loans and things of this nature, but we never actually see how that actually plays out, right? Do these entities repay these loans? Do they actually hit the benchmarks and they earn it and turn it into a grant? And why isn't it presented to us in clearer fashion? And why can't we easily follow it in real time? Honestly, this is one of my biggest criticisms these days when we're talking about things like budgets, government deficit, and government spending, as well as all the government boondoggles. And there's a lot of them, right? What we've seen play out during COVID-19, the amount of like grift and graft and opportunity for people to take advantage of the Canadian taxpayer is honestly at an unprecedented level. Essentially, I'm going to be releasing a 3-part video series over the next 3 days. And it's going to be focused just on government mismanagement of COVID-19 and some of the most questionable decisions the Canadian government made when it came to actually doing COVID-19 spending. When we compare COVID-19 spending and adjust for inflation, we've actually spent more on it than World War II. And understand, whenever there's a huge emergency, whenever there's a huge influx of government spending and regulation, it creates these huge opportunities for bad actors to take advantage of the government and by proxy, take advantage of the Canadian taxpayer. And there's honestly some real doozies that you guys are going to see in part 3 of that video series. But the reason I bring it up now is this is what the war on climate change is shaping up to be as well. This is going to be honestly probably an even larger magnitude of government corruption, mismanagement, spending, terrible policies with unintended consequences. Honestly, I think that COVID-19 will just be a shadow of what climate change and the war on climate change is going to be, unless we start having much more honest and open discussions rather than just taking all of our orders from, you know, a Swedish girl that yells at us, right? That's where Greta was from. But anyways, Canada to invest $518 million in 2 GM plants. Next from CPC News, Canada may have hit its long-awaited electric vehicle turning point. And now if you just read this on the surface, you might be like, oh, it sounds like people want electric vehicles and like it's all the free market's just going to work itself out. But right here in the byline, despite industry foot dragging, experts say forced sales will transform the market. So if you guys want to see some of the government policies that they're enacting here to essentially like force dealerships, force Canadians to be presented with these options, regardless of whether there's a particular demand in this moment in time in the market for them, government doesn't care because they see their job as correcting all of our behaviors, right? Not protecting individual sovereignty. It's all literally just forcing and carrot and sticking us into whatever behavior they believe is the net benefit. Again, this is I could go on a long tangent in regards to all this. I'll save you guys just the ranting tonight. But it is important we understand that what is shaping up with climate change, again, I think is going to make COVID look like a minor blip. And COVID was more expensive for Canada than World War II. Next, from CTV News, Canadians becoming more divided over COVID-19 policies, survey says. And this brings me into the first red pill story of the night. And I just wanted to highlight this because, one, I'm definitely not surprised by it. Two, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. And three, just want to share a couple of highlights from the study. So the majority said COVID-19 pandemic, 72%, and the 2021 federal election, 73%, were the two most divisive issues over the past year. About 40% of those surveyed said they have reduced contact with friends and family over an argument about the pandemic or politics. And I'd love to hear anecdotally, what's been your experiences? Have you been cut off from friends and family? Have you cut off friends and family? And what is your line in the sand for making these decisions? I don't think any of those sort of decisions should ever be made lightly. At the same time, I do believe we're the sum of our inputs, and you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you find, friends or family that you spend a lot of time with are vehemently opposed to your perspective on politics and policy, or they literally interpret reality completely fundamentally different than you, there's also probably going to be a lot of friction in your life that if you didn't have them in your life would be unnecessary. So there are trade-offs there. Obviously it's a very personal decision, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions. I think for most people, rather than immediately cutting off friends or family, maybe trying to limit, your interactions around subject matters that are hotspots are probably the best starting point. At the end of the day, it's very hard to convince someone of something, right? In fact, I honestly think things like memes and humor are probably more effective than lectures, although I probably tend towards lectures when I'm interacting with people. So I need to take some of my own advice in that regards. And then finally, leading by example, right? I think that's the most powerful thing any of us can do when it comes to this. So are you actually living in accordance with your ethics and moral behavior, or your ethic and moral code? Does your behavior reflect that? I think that's a big question that all of us right now need to be asking ourselves, because again, it can be so easy, particularly for Canadians, in my opinion, to want to go along to get along. And so one other point here, unfortunately, what we're seeing is politicians that are using that division for political benefit when those leaders should be seeking to unite us and not divide us. And while I agree in theory with this, or in principle, realistically, I think that we're past the point of nonpartisan politics. I think that our country and a lot of countries in the West have become so divisive around a handful of subject matters or policy issues that I don't see how we reconcile it. In fact, more and more often I start to find myself drifting in thought towards things like what, Tim Pool has talked about in some of his guests on his show, discussing the ideas that we're literally in the midst of a cultural civil war. And it's not a hot kinetic war, but we are starting to see people self-select and, have in-group preferences to those that have similar policy views and worldviews as themselves. And while it may not be along exactly geographical lines, there definitely seems to be a rural and urban divide to a certain extent, as well as even just looking at coastal regions in both Canada and the US, and looking at the center or the Midwest of the country as well. Next from Twitter, this is Jesse Brown. In 2020, the Trudeau government started paying ongoing subsidies to newspapers. It was a trip into the unknown. How did government decide which papers to bail out and which to let die? What about independence of the press? Big question now. There are 2 years of answers. And this is a great thread that he really explores. And there's a lot of points here worth spending time to go down your own rabbit hole on. So there's links to this story as well as all the stories we're covering tonight in the video description down below. But first, he starts off just highlighting the 5 individuals that essentially are on this board that decides, these board of experts, I should say, government experts, of course, they get to decide essentially who gets free government money for their paper and who is, a thought criminal or not a real journalist and doesn't deserve free money from the government. This is all just bad. I honestly don't know how anyone can frame this as good. The government paying out hundreds of millions of dollars, right? I believe we saw Canadian government pay out was it close to 600 or maybe just over $600 million to media companies, excluding, of course, the CBC, which got 1.3 million or 1.3 billion. Sorry, 1.3 million. That's a drop in the bucket for CPC. 1.3 billion from CBC. I just think that maybe there was an era where it could be justified, these sort of policies, but that era would have been well before the internet. Now that we live in the digital age, for so much money into these failing empires. It makes sense. So again, I encourage you guys. Jess really did a lot of work breaking down this entire thread, so it's worth you taking the time to kind of go through point by point. Next, from the Epic Times, Disney employees say fearful silent majority in favor of parental rights in education bill. And so we've touched upon this, previously. Critics or people that just don't care about the truth will frame what DeSantis signed into law previously as, don't say gay bill. And it's given such a great opportunity for mainstream media and celebrities to virtue signal by going on, TikTok and saying the word gay 1,000 times or whatever, or yelling it at the Oscars, right? But what I do think is interesting here is, one, do you guys believe that the majority of Disney employees are actually just the silent majority that agree with parental rights, that don't want to see sexual orientation taught to kindergartners through grade 3? Or do you think that, this is maybe just one fringe employee at Disney speaking out? Because when we see some of the different videos coming out from Disney employees, and they're talking about, their goals to, remove all pronouns or all like he, she's from characters, to try and implement, policies where 50% or more characters would identify as LGBTQ plus AI something. I forget. But, that alphabet soup. Do you believe that? Do you whose side do you take at this point in time, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask. And one of the reasons I think it's worth asking is, can Disney be saved? Yeah, I'm sure lots of us probably have certain memories of certain, whether it's a Disney family vacation, whether it's a certain Disney movie or cartoon TV show. Do you think that these institutions can be saved, or are we better off just starting over with them? Because honestly, if the silent majority of Disney employees are afraid to speak out, it doesn't really make me think that it's worth saving it any more than if they were 100% on board with the trans agenda in regards to, grooming your children, essentially. Love to hear your thoughts, your opinions in that comment section. Next, from True North, Ontario health experts want masks back despite higher rates in mask regions. This is worth kind of looking into if somehow you're new to the idea of masks and the debate going on. But when you actually look at the data, it's really hard to tell when most jurisdictions or countries or states implement masks and when they take them off. If you're literally looking at just like infection rates and stuff like that, you'd probably be a lot better to study seasonality of COVID than you would, masking mandates, if you want to actually understand when things seem to blow up and when there's consequences to these, to the general public in regards to COVID-19. But yeah, I just, July 1st of last year, I decided I was absolutely done, just under no circumstances other than getting on an airplane or doing must do banking if the bank refused to work with me otherwise, that I'd wear a mask. And it wasn't really that hard to conform to, right? There was a couple times that, small store owners, actually just really one that I can think of off the top of my head, a variety store owner, I think it was actually just an hourly employee, refused to serve me. And they were like, you can do roadside pickup. And I was like, I was just going to make a bad dietary choice anyways. You know what? I'll just not buy anything from you. I'm just going to get back in my car and keep driving. So again, I think that those of us that actually want to see a better future tomorrow, we need to start having our actions actually back up what our positions are. Next, from Post Millennial, no jail time for BC woman who vandalized church will be made to apologize and pay fine. So Emily Luba, one of the sisters, must now write a 500-word apology to the church and pay $1,250 fine. She will receive no criminal record. I think this is interesting because essentially she's charged with mischief. similar to what we've seen individuals charged with the Freedom Trucker Convoy. And yet I don't remember her being made out to be this evil demon, right? Or a fringe minority. And this was during the era when, back in Canada, when we were seeing churches burn down, right? We saw far more violence and far more property destruction during that phase of civil unrest than we did during the Freedom Trucker Convoy. At least if you're looking at direct damage, right? I understand that enemies of the Freedom Trucker Convoy will point to economic impact of shutting down roads and things of that nature. But if we're actually looking at just straight up, does vandalism, does burning down churches cost more to fix and replace than people just protesting in Ottawa? Seems like the former is the bigger form of mischief. And I don't know, there's just something kind of funny to me that you have to write a 500-word apology, right? Like, does your grammar need to be on point? Does it need to be like a B+ effort? Or could it just be the word apology copy pasted 500 times? Because this is where we are as a society. I hope someone's enjoying it. But anyway, again, I don't want to like make her out to be a demon, right? Like, people make stupid decisions, do stupid things. I don't think she should be treated any more harshly or any less harshly than anyone else that would commit a similar sort of crime, right? But yeah, just interesting to say the least how this is being framed versus how the Freedom Trucker Convoy was framed. Next from Glenn Greenwald, and I think, again, Glenn does a great in-depth job here on this article, so I encourage you guys to read it cover to cover. You should already be subscribed to his Substack if you're not. But your top priority in the emotional comfort of the most powerful elites, which you fulfill by never criticizing them. So corporate journalists have license to use their huge platforms to malign, expose, and destroy anyone they want. Your moral duty, sit in respectful silence and never object. And this is really, seems to be the case these days in mainstream media. If you misgender someone, if you use the wrong pronoun, you're the devil. But at the same time, cancel culture is allowed to rage rampant, right? And it's not about saying that, we want to see cancel culture in every aspect of civil discourse, right? In my opinion, I would like to see individuals make individual decisions and vote with their dollars, rather than just like cancel culture mobs, like frothing at the mouth, wanting their pound of flesh. But it is interesting to see so many news reporters these days lamenting the lack of trust and some of the frustration and hate that gets directed at them, right? We saw this with the Freedom Trucker Convoy. We've discussed it in the past with politicians, right? I'm trying to think, was it Chrystia Freeland or McKenna? I think it was McKenna claimed that she was like the most attacked politician. And then when we actually looked at it, it turned out there was like kind of 2 formal complaints or issues. And even if we like group in mean tweets, it gets closer to like half a dozen. Honestly, I get just as many every year. Maybe because I'm just like a nobody YouTuber, they're less serious or they feel less serious, or maybe I've just got thicker skin because of sticks and stones, will break my bones and words will never hurt me. But it just is interesting to see the race to victimhood. Whenever things aren't going the way of a lot of these mainstream media reporters, one of the first things they do is try and figure out where on the victimhood bingo card they can, claim their victimhood. Next from Niall Ferguson, and this brings me into the first Black Pill story of the day, 7 worst case scenarios from the war in Ukraine. I'm a big fan of Niall's writing. I'm also a big fan of the fact that he's involved with the new University of Austin, right, in Texas. And I thought this was well put together and well thought out. And if you guys want to kind of go down the rabbit hole of what could be some of the long-term consequences of what's playing out right now in Ukraine, I think you do a lot worse than to read this article. Next from Blacklocks reporter, nominate disputed story for Journalism Excellence Prize. So the Canadian Journalism Foundation is nominating for an Excellence Award disputed accounts of an anti-pipeline protest. The federal memo contradicts media versions of the 2021 arrest of a reporter for the Narwhal, a subsidized environmental advocacy website. And yeah, there's actually a lot to the story. We've covered it briefly in the past, particularly when we're pointing out the disparity in mainstream media's coverage of the Freedom Trucker Convoy and the occupation of some of these pipelines. If I remember correctly, this is the same story where there's eyewitness accounts, and I believe even some video documentation of what actually went down. And this reporter's perspective, or the way they framed it, seems to leave out a handful of very key details. Things such as the fact that like the protesters weren't completely nonviolent, things like the fact that the police actually tried to have open discussions with them and told them in advance what their plans were and how they were going to essentially shut down the protest. Again, really encourage you guys, go check out Blacklock's Reporter. And again, you should already probably be a paying member, because they're one of the few news organizations here in Canada that feel like they're actually doing real news reporting. And we could use a little bit more of that. And I imagine they're also the same sort of company that probably gets no government money. It's funny how that works, eh? But mask mistake worth $106 million. And just as an FYI guy, this story came out after I put together my top 10 government, questionable spending moments. Honestly, there's a good chance this one maybe still wouldn't have made it, because there was just so many questionable COVID spending choices the government made over the last 2 years. But hurried COVID contracting and outright theft of public health agency supplies cost taxpayers more than $106 million, records show. The agency said it did its best. Despite the agency's best efforts in ensuring value for money and minimizing risks associated with purchasing such a large amount of goods, some vendors did not provide deliverables, the agency wrote in an inquiry of ministry tabled in the comments. No managers were fired. The agency is reporting a loss of $105 million due to advance payments made to suppliers for orders that will not be fulfilled, wrote staff. These cases relate to goods purchased as part of the agency's COVID-19 response. 3 companies were named. Tango Communications Marketing in Montreal is being sued by federal lawyers for $82 million over the purchase of 37 million masks from China. The deliveries were late and shoddy, according to Ontario Superior Court records. And this is something we actually get into in the 3-part video series that's going to come out later this week. Looking at the fact that a lot of the awards government gave to these spending initiatives around COVID-19 and PPE equipment was essentially to oftentimes companies that had no history of working in these industries, right? We also covered the fact that of over 100 PPE manufacturers in Canada, Canada did not contract a single one of those. We had the that was too many P's. The PPE industry spokesperson, which represents over 100 Canadian PPE manufacturers, saying that like, yo, you guys literally didn't choose us at all. Instead, what ended up happening was we contracted a bunch of middlemen, gave them oftentimes essentially blank checks and said, do your best, whatever you can bring over here, right? And there was a lot of sole source contracts that went down as well. Again, we're going to get into that in a couple of weeks, or in a couple of days. So I'll leave that those little stories for later. But now moving on from black pill, this is going to bring us into our first white pill story, or it's not our first white pill, our first clown pill story. And honestly, it's funny to me to watch mainstream media and certain, previous government employees and now turned pundits talking about Pierre Poilievre and his desire to talk about Bitcoin. And while I won't make you guys watch this whole 2-minute video, it's worth watching the start.
Banks, your former central banker, are a key feature in Pierre Poilievre's campaign, and he had a big rally, 1,000 people in Ottawa recently, and he said, look, Canada should become the crypto capital of the world, because Canadians need to be in charge of their own money supply. And he used the phrase, through Bitcoin, you could opt out of inflation. How do you interpret what he means by opt out of inflation by using Bitcoin and controlling our own money? What's your response to that?
Well, first, I think Canadians do control their own money through their own central bank, a very transparent process by which it's administered.
So I'll just take a little bit of a moment here to talk about, but I encourage you guys spend the time and go through Stephen's entire thread here. But do you as a Canadian feel like you control your own money through the central bank? Do you understand how the central bank works? Did you vote for the central bank and their policies? I guess I just don't remember doing those things, right? It may be a crown corporation, but it is not directly controlled by us. And it's certainly, like, despite whatever it may claim in its mandates, its desire is not to help the average Canadian. Its desire is not even to protect the average Canadian from inflation, right? It's got a mandate to try and keep inflation to like 2 to 3%. So again, literally built into the Bank of Canada's the goal of making your money worth less every year. Right now, they're making it worth a lot less every year than what their stated goal is. So, depending upon how you want to interpret that, they're crushing it or they're crushing us, maybe a bit of both. But to think that we actually feel like we're in control of our own currency, absolutely not. They can change the rules at any moment in time. we saw this isn't a central bank issue, but we saw with the Freedom Trucker Convoy, they can freeze your bank accounts whenever they deem it's an emergency to do so. Something we're going to cover in tomorrow's video is the Canadian government considered claiming a state of emergency and enacting the Emergencies Act during the start of COVID-19 and literally nationalizing PPE factories. So the Canadian government literally considered and talked about the idea of seizing factories in order to create PPE equipment. Now, thankfully, we didn't go full communist. Instead, we just gave a bunch of middlemen tons of money. And, some of them actually delivered some stuff. Most of the time shoddy and late. But, hey, they did something. But, yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating to me. I would never trust a banker. And I would doubly never trust a central banker. So pretty much anything Stephen Pelosi says here is in one ear out the other, in my opinion. And what is interesting, though, is like they don't even try and, frame anything, right? The central bank policies that allow, to a certain extent, the Canadian government to get away with deficit spending, we now find ourselves in a $1.2 trillion deficit, as I've, belabored the point multiple times now. I'm going to do it a lot more tomorrow. But understand that wouldn't work the same way if we had to pay that back in Bitcoin or gold. The government would never be able to get out from under that debt. We would literally at some point in time have to declare insolvency. We would have to welch on that debt that we're beholden to at this moment in time. Where right now, because of, funny monetary policies and fiat monetary policies, we can play that game of shell, or like that shell game for, what feels like an indefinite period. But understand, no fiat currency has ever lasted indefinitely. There's no reason to think the Canadian dollar is any different than that. Next, getting into my first white pill story of the day. You guys know I'm a big fanboy of David Anber. He's representing multiple parties involved with the Freedom Trucker Convoy. He's regularly speaking out for Canadians' rights and freedoms. And I thought he put together a really well thought out thread here explaining his personal decision around vaccination. Honestly, at this point in time, feels like such a binary issue that the idea of nuanced conversation is almost lost on all of us. And again, I'm just as guilty as the next person, but I really think David did a good job here of explaining his perspective. And while you may not agree with his final decision or what he ended up doing, I think it's worthwhile exploring that thread. And anytime I can give him props, I'm going to give him props. Next, this is from the Counter Signal. Alberta brings forth a bill to attract cryptocurrency companies. And now this is by no means like perfect policy here that's being crafted in Alberta that's going to turn it into the next, Miami or El Salvador. It's at least nice to see politicians on the provincial level thinking about this, talking about it, right? These are the baby steps necessary. I don't think we want to be left behind in the world of, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and Web3. And I do try and distinguish those three things separately. So again, they're not all under the same exact umbrella in my mind or my worldview, but there is value in each one of those sectors, in my opinion. And it would, behoove every provincial government to look to Alberta's playbook here and look to, other states. I believe we've seen some very favorable policies out of the city of Miami, the state of Florida, the state of Wyoming, I think even like Kentucky, and is it Tennessee as well? There's a handful of states that are very proactive in trying to attract capital. And I think it's very wise to try and attract capital under the current circumstances in regards to Bitcoiners or cryptocurrency hodlers, because I think that on a long enough time horizon, if you've got a low enough time preference, 10, 15 years from now, we could potentially, and again, this is when like I kind of go down my rabbit hole of orange pill, but like, I hear some of these Bitcoin maxis talk about the idea of like entire economies or small communities cropping up around individuals that have a substantial amount of Bitcoins. Because again, the same way that, wealth just naturally attracts service providers, good providers, and all that. I think that we could see this play out as well. And what's, I think, unique about a lot of Bitcoiners is their natural perspective on not necessarily wanting to fit the classic mold of success, right? Like they don't all want to live in dense urban environments. A lot of them want to be a little bit off the beaten path. And I think that could really create some interesting new dynamics for how cities and communities and societies evolve over these coming years. And again, I think it would be a great idea for a lot of provinces to at least become informed about this, if nothing else. Next from Fee Stories, did Elon Musk just say free speech? Well, I don't think I'd go quite that far. It is interesting to see him purchase essentially 9.2%, I believe it was, for roughly $3 billion of Twitter. Did not see that coming. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your conspiracy theories on all this. I already saw there was some Twitter employees that were rage quitting on Twitter. And that does kind of make me think that, hey, this is a step in the right direction. If you're going to be so upset that Elon Musk owns 9.2% of your company that you're rage quitting, yeah, I think you're too sensitive to be working for a social media company. Now looking at the meme of the day, this is from Rothmus, and I thought this one was particularly good. Survival tip. If lost in the woods, build a shelter. The tax collector will be there shortly. Yeah, it does feel that way sometimes, eh? When you need help, the government seems to usually only be there to, compound the issue. But when you make money, when you've got something nice, they always want their piece. They always want their cut. And then finally, just want to share with you guys, I've launched a new podcast with my business partner, Dan. Dan the NFT boy, or Dan the Lost boy, you may know him as, but DGen Friends, an NFT podcast. So there's not too many DGen Friends out there. So if you type it into YouTube, you'll be able to find it, because I forgot to link to it in the video description down below. But really encourage you guys to check it out. And essentially just us talking about NFTs. Not saying that you need to get into NFTs, but you may as well start educating yourself at least a little bit on the subject matter. And that's it for today's Maple Pill. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As I mentioned, the next 3 days, we're going to be doing a special series of videos where we're going to be looking at the most questionable spending decisions the Canadian government made during COVID-19, as well as looking at what's been the full economic impact in regards to our deficit, not even looking at, unintended consequences like the mental health crisis, or, sacrificing potentially an entire generation of children's development because of all our crazy COVID policies and mandates. But we're really just going to be looking at the dollars and cents in this 3-part video series. I think it's important. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you enjoyed tonight's video, if you enjoy what I'm usually trying to do here on the Maple Pill, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. Again, I would love to get to 1,000 YouTube subscribers before they delete me off the platform. If you guys hate watching me on Big Tech, I don't blame you. You can also watch the videos. I upload them right afterwards to Rumble and BitChute. If you think I should be on another social media platform or video platform, let me know which one. I'm tempted to, pay the membership to start uploading on Gab. Would you guys watch it on Gab? I'm tempted to start paying the price so that I can live stream on Rumble. Would you watch it live on Rumble? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you want more Matt McKeever in your life, you can check out Matt McKeever Unfiltered on Instagram. Essentially me just like sharing memes and my frustrations with the government and what feels like all the stupidity around us these days and just modern society. But anyways, I appreciate you guys making this a two-way conversation by jumping in that comment section. So let's quickly check out what's going on in that. There won't be a Monday mailbag episode. I haven't got any mail as well. I've got other things on the go this week, so we won't be doing the mailbag. But you know what? I'll make a promise. Next Monday, regardless of whether I get mail or not, we'll hang out and chat, assuming you guys would like that. But let's pull up the chat for now. Appreciate Graham jumping in the chat. We've got Sandra, Basmatic. I love how the left has created a narrative about populism now. It does seem to be a dirty word these days amongst the left and mainstream media, that populism. And honestly, I'm just going to lean into it. Like, in general, I think, at least historically, the definition of populism, if I'm not mistaken, is, an anti-elite, an anti-technocrat perspective, right? And let me know if I'm misremembering here, but I'm pretty sure that's the definition of populism. And if that's the case, I'm cool with it. Yeah, let's be populist. If it's populist to just be like, you know what, I'm tired of elites telling me what to do. Just leave me the fuck alone. Terry says the idea of mandating electricity as a fuel source truly scares me. Many issues revolving it. Yeah, and certainly in its current state, our grid can't handle it. If we don't embrace nuclear, I don't understand how we can get to the point where we can essentially have all vehicles transition and all small combustible motors and engines transferred to electricity. I'm also not sure, is it just as effective, way up north, those electric vehicles, as a combustion engine? And honestly, I don't know the answer to it, so it's not me being glib there. We've got Project LB52 in the chat. What's up, Dan? We've got Aislinn. Terry, how about instead of giving our tons of money, let's entice great companies to set up shop here? Yeah, you would think we could just reduce regulation, reduce red tape, make it easier to do business here. And that would be enough instead of being like, oh, let me cut you a giant check in the hopes that you stick around for a bit. Again, it's a very transactional relationship, and it should be no wonder to us that all these corporations treat the state transactionally when the state treats those corporations transactionally as well. Terry, you're right, Matt. Do as you say. It's harder than it seems to not be hypocritical sometimes, especially with all the info flying around. Yeah, and it is very hard. 100% agree with you. And I think one of the things first is try not get hijacked by our emotions, right? So if you see like an unverified post or unverified conspiracy theory or whatever it is, and you're like, oh, emotionally, it'll feel so good to reshare this immediately. Those are usually the times that, and I'm guilty of this as well, that whatever, whether it's 10 minutes or 10 hours or 10 days later, someone's going to come out and be like, oh, you shared fake news. And again, that's never a good feeling, in my opinion. And so one of the things I first try and do is, before I post it, I first confirm like this is an emotional decision to post it, right? And I think all of us are a lot better when we're focused on just being rational, logical actors. Benjamin, hey everyone. Aislinn, 499 word apology. You are not sorry. 501 word apology. You are making a mockery out of this apology. 500 word apology. We're cool as long as you also pay us money. Bite Hunters in the chat. I tried to buy Twitter after I found out Musk bought Twitter, but the market was closed. Yeah, and I think it jumped like, was it like 20% or something? I, again, don't really follow stocks, but pretty sure I saw that in a headline. We've got Sam Sand in the chat. Hey, appreciate the support. And we've got Step as well. Great show, man. Enjoy the company this week. Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Glad that you guys are getting value from the Maple Pill and you're enjoying what I'm doing here. And yeah, just remember, you're not alone. That's what they want us all to feel like, right? Alone, isolated, scared, fearful. And with that, they hope that we do nothing, right? And we essentially just crumble and cave into their demands. In fact, the best thing we can do is focus on living our best life, building out strong social networks, right? Don't depend on their social safety net. Let's build our own social safety net amongst the individuals that we're actually like our neighbors with, that are our friends and family. That's honestly, I think, their worst nightmare. It's just all of us being able to exist without them. And most of the time, they're gaslighting us into believing we need them a lot more than they need us. They are truly the parasite class. They only can exist off of us. They don't really create. They don't actually build. And, that's one of the things that gives me hope. And I hope it gives you guys hope too. I'll see you tomorrow, and we'll be doing that special series. I hope you guys enjoy it. Night, guys.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, stable scheming.